Before the Ranger Creed is recited by a formation of Rangers at any ceremony, you will always hear the narrator say this: "Will all Rangers, past and present, please join us as we recite the Ranger Creed." Every Ranger will stand, and as they say those six stanzas, they are transformed back to a time when they had the pleasure and the burden of this brotherhood. That feeling is hard to describe. However, it's one that never leaves you. It's a connection that spans the globe and can be reignited when you hear the phrase, "Hey, Ranger, what battalion are you from?" Amongst this formation, there are Rangers that stand out. They are legends of this elite organization, and when their names are spoken, people instantly have a story and for a moment relive it. Legend of the 75th podcast wants to capture those feelings and those stories. We want to ensure that these legends' triumphs and sacrifices never fade away. So sit back with your favorite adult beverage and listen to the stories from the legends of the 75th. Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Legends of the 75th. I'm pretty excited about this episode. We've been trying to do it for a very, very long time, but we both have busy schedules, and that's just kind of the way that the life works sometimes. So I have the absolute honor and privilege of introducing retired four-star general of the United States Army, Austin Miller. He's a graduate of the Military Academy at West Point, class of 1983. He went on to serve in 2nd Ranger Battalion and units across all of JSOC. And then he had a very, very interesting command and a very interesting time at the Maneuver Center of Excellence at Fort Benning, now Fort Moore, and then went back to JSOC and serving in JSOC as a commander, and then the commander of NATO's Resolute support mission and U.S. forces in Afghanistan from 2018 to 2021. And there's a lot of things that he oversaw, and there's a lot of critical things that he participated across the global war on terrorism and across the globe. So we're definitely going to dive into it in this episode. I'm very, very excited to sit down with you today, sir. How you doing?
Good, Mike. You can call me Scott, okay? I got my
Okay.
Scott. All right, we'll have to get used to that.
Yeah,
But I'm
we
doing well,
definitely.
thank you. And you're right. We've been trying to do this for quite some time now, so I'm glad we were able to connect.
Yeah, and it comes because, and I tell a lot of the guests this, sir, is that you don't realize that people that you've impacted not only with your time as command, but then also from afar, just because they've seen your actions, and they've served underneath you in some capacity, and they just love to hear from you, especially since your retirement. And I'll even name one that I know you know very well, Joe Brierley, that recently retired. So him and I were actually just talking about you the other day, and he was talking about some of the impact that you've had on him and some of the amazing things that you've done. So there, boom, name dropped. So, hey, sir, if we can, let's start at the very beginning. Why did you want to join the military? Why did you want to serve?
Yeah. Hey, Mike, first of all, thanks. And what I just say is, I know your title is Legends of the 75th. I feel a little bit of imposter syndrome with that particular title right up front. So, but again, thanks for having me on this. I go up to the military academy quite frequently. I'm a senior fellow up there. Perhaps we can talk a little bit about that later. And I get a chance to talk to two cadets, 18 to 22-year-old men, young men and women that are gonna go ahead and ideally lead certainly our sons and daughters going forward here. And they'll always ask me, "Did you know you always wanted to be a four-star general?" And I actually tell them I'm the accidental. I mean, even the accidental career officer, let alone a flag officer. I didn't think I was going to stay in the United States Military Academy for a solid 4 years. And just some things kept happening along the way. And then somewhere in there, you hit the right inspiration, the right inspirational leader.
Right.
Things come together. And that sort of pushed me in a direction. And then I just took it 6 months at a time and kept liking it as I moved through the different gates.
Yeah, no, I mean, we all have those pivotal points. I mean, that's where we are shared is one. I definitely didn't think I was going to be a career, but I will even say during my first enlistment, the last, half of my enlistment, I was the guy with the counter on the wall, counting down the days till I got out. And then that one wheeler, or I'm sorry, that one leader, and you know him very well, Master Sergeant Josh Wheeler. That's the guy that changed everything for me.
Yeah, I don't believe that I knew as a cadet or certainly maybe even a junior officer that really understood the implications of raising your right hand and
Right.
swearing to support and defend the Constitution, which is now it's something I can talk to them about and talk to them about the multiple times they've raised their right hand, and they will again, assuming they're successful on commissioning day, and they'll recite that oath, which talks about the Constitution of the United States of America. And I'm certainly much more cognizant and became more so as I progressed through my military career.
So what would your kind of advice, be to, those young officers or young enlisted, they're just kind of entering their careers then, sir?
When I talk
Sorry.
with the cadets in particular, what I talk to them about is making sure they understand the gravity of what's about to be bestowed upon them, because that's what it is. You're commissioned, and certainly there's other commissioning sources. You have ROTC, you have OCS, you even have direct commissioning. So it's really incumbent upon all of our commissioned officers to really understand that the day they pin on, plus a basic course, maybe a specialty school like Ranger School or something else, they're in charge of our young men and women, and we refer to it as our national treasure, and I don't think that's an overstatement. And I remind them that there's parents and siblings and friends that are hoping they're really good people.
Yeah,
they're good leaders.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I think it's amazing that you go back to West Point as much as you do and you talk to them. And the West Point, I've had an opportunity to sit on a couple panels and do a couple things up there, and I'm always just overcome with the magnitude and the loyalty and just the amazingness of the cadets there. And there's a reason that it is the academy that it is, and it has the professors that it has, and all the faculty. So after
So what's interesting about it for people like you and me, more so me, because I'm even further removed, is getting an opportunity to sit in and amongst a demographic that you're probably not going to gravitate towards.
Yeah.
Somewhere between 18 and 22, and believe it or not, they do things different than we did.
Yeah,
and in many cases, I personally find them as a much better place than I was at that time. And I remind people of that. I said, I don't think the Corps of Cadets has problems. I think it actually, if you get up there and you look at it, you're quite impressed.
Yeah, the last time that I went up there, one of the instructors that I'd served with, I think in 275, I'd served with him in 275. He asked me to come and sit on a class, and they were actually talking about an operation that many of us were a part of, and the questions they were asking, I'm like, there ain't no way in hell I was asking those kind of questions when I was a 19-year-old, 21-year-old person.
I tell people it's actually kind of like talking to Rangers too, or anybody in the community. You better get up there and be authentic, because the first time you're not, they will tune you out in a second.
Yeah, they see through that shit very quickly. I agree 100%. Well, after graduating, from West Point, sir, what was your path to actually end up serving in 275?
Yeah, so I came out of what we used to call IBOLC now, or excuse me, the Infantry Officers Basic Course, IOBC,
right?
Now referred to as the IBOLC,
yeah.
and you're on a preordained path. I was already airborne qualified. So you're supposed to go to Ranger School, and then I was going to go to the 82nd Airborne Division. And I think I said this at our 275 reunion, and everybody has a Ranger School story. And for years, I wouldn't even tell it, because it's you either went to Ranger School and made it, or you didn't go to Ranger School, or something happened. Yeah. And actually, what happened with our class, we came out of the course the year prior. Apparently, they'd had a lot of winter injuries, and I found out. I didn't really read orders very closely. I don't know anybody who really does, but
no.
there's a little annotation. So somewhere in the M through Z, we picked up. We went from quota sources to space available, and I was in that pile of people that were space available. And we went over to the Ranger Department, and they promptly said, "You're leaving, and you're going to your units." And so I shipped off to the 82nd Airborne Division as somebody without a Ranger tab, which of course you're convinced the world is over at that point. Yeah, and this is the time when the 82nd had just returned from Grenada, so they've got combat patches and CIBs and all kinds of Grenada war stories on there, and it worked out okay. I'd eventually get back to Ranger School, and actually after I graduated from Ranger School, that's when I put in my packet to go to 2nd Ranger Battalion. But I spent time as a platoon leader and time as an S3 Air, a little bit of acting XO, but did all my first assignments at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, now Fort Liberty, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And was very excited to go to a Ranger Battalion and have the opportunity to go to a battalion. This is pre-RASP days. We you just go into the RIP program and a little bit of a gentleman's course, although you did have the standards that you had to pass. But I knew I wanted to do it. I was actually presented with a little bit of a dilemma as I was getting ready to leave. As I said, I was the S3R. We had a battalion change of command. My previous battalion commander was okay with me leaving, and my new battalion commander wanted me to stay. And the reason why is this was an organization that was going to go to be a cohort for Vincenzo, which is actually a pretty cool assignment.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I was set on going to a Ranger battalion. And so he presented me with one night of, hey, if you stay, I'll make you the recon platoon leader after but I want you to stay as the S3R to help us get over to Italy. And I waited about a day and I went back to him. It was a tough conversation, but I said, no, I think I really need to go to 2nd Ranger Battalion and give this a shot. So things could always change on this path we call a military career.
Yeah. Was there any Rangers or any leaders that kind of made you think that way about going to Ranger Battalion? Was there any influences that impacted that?
Oh, absolutely. We had lieutenants that had gone off. I watched them leave and go to a Ranger Battalion. But it was realistically, it was Ranger School, and it was the meeting those young PFCs and that are prior to them having their tabs. And I had two Ranger buddies, a guy named Matt Gilbert, Beast Gilbert, and a guy named Sterling Sawyer, and we still stay in touch today. But we started together, and we all finished at the same time. But it was just an opportunity to meet for the first time, really the private first class, who someday is going to be a sergeant major. But meeting them young in their careers and talking to them about what life is like in the Ranger Battalion. And that made it a no-brainer as soon as I graduated, I put in the packet.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And you're not the first officer to actually say that, so that's good to hear. Well, what was your experience at 275 upon arrival?
275 was, it's been a long time, but when I just look back to 275, we were in a task condition standards phase for the Army. We may still be in that. I'm just not aware of it, but it was very rigid in the Ranger Regiment. Regiment was had just been stood up, and 275 was a little bit more sua sponte, as you well know, and they liked being geographically separated from.
Damn right we did.
From regiment. I'll talk about Joe Stringham on here a little bit because I was afraid of him for many years.
Good, yeah.
But they were a little bit looser, and just of their own accord was we'll look at the problem and we'll figure out we're going to assess the conditions, then we'll figure out how we're going to go ahead and get this done.
Yeah.
So that of course you had that, but when you look back on it, and you saw it when we were up at JBLM Fort Lewis this past October, lifelong friends, and an officer and non-commissioned officer. I the names and just being able to run down memory lane with the Earth Pigs from A Company.
Yeah.
We probably had about 10 or 15 people there.
That's amazing.
So you're looking at your privates, and they're all 60 years old, and you're looking at them going, hey, when did you guys get so old? But that was one of those positives coming out of it, but those friends. But it goes beyond just my platoon. I remember running into Staff Sergeant Greg Birch. I didn't know his first name was Greg. As a squad leader in A Company, and he was just getting ready to go do something. Yeah. And, Greg would disappear soon thereafter. Scotty Brazil, Dean Barnhart, Brian Briggs. Sitting over in B Company. Bill Lazinski, former regimental commander, but also a very important person in my life, certainly during those years. John Mesa-Hunis, Matt Ryerson. It was just an incredible list of people that you knew you were going to stay in touch with over the years. Chris Sorensen, Pete Blaber, Mike Koss. Just the list goes on and on. And, one I'll shout out to, and I hope he's able to listen to it. He's a little sick right now. Vinnie McMahon was one of my E5 sergeant squad leaders in the Earth Pigs. And he literally just ETS'd. So he had gone straight through everything, but he ETS'd in E5. Disappeared on us, went back to New City, New York, and joined the fire department. But Vinny, the Vinnie McMahons of the world, these are just incredible people that you still stay in touch with this many years later. but what an experience. I don't know where if it still continued, because I don't know if they sat in a session where Randy Inman, who by the way was PFC and specialist Randy Inman, when Lieutenant Miller had a chance to run around with him, and we talked about that on the stage a little bit. He mentioned South Rainier, and you just remember the field problems in South Rainier, the long movements. Like you really didn't believe anybody was going to really make you do this on an RTEP. And you started counting up the clicks and the miles at the conclusion of it. You go, they really made us move this distance under loads and executing our collective tasks there. So it just is a special time, and what a place to learn the craft of being in the Army, being an infantry platoon leader, and having this quality non-commissioned officers and enlisted personnel around you. Just phenomenal.
Yeah. It's funny. I just talked to General Farrader a couple weeks ago, and he actually said it in the podcast. He said, South Rainier, the worst place in the world to do movements through. And I was like, I thought about it for a second. I'm like, I don't think he's wrong.
No. I can recall, because our battalion commander, Jeff Ellis, another name.
Yeah.
He loved those field problems. And we'd probably about this time of the year, we'd jump into I don't remember the HLZ down very far down in the deep south there.
Point Salinas. Or no, deep south. No,
was it Rogers maybe?
No, Roger. I know which one you're talking about. I think it's Merrill. It
might be Merrill.
Yeah.
But I recall jumping in, and this is 86 probably. Jumped in, and we actually had a fatality on the jump. One of the new guys from A Company had a complete malfunction. We lost his life, and so we're assembling in the night, putting this, getting the platoon and the companies organized, getting ready to move on to our March objectives, and you're thinking, well, maybe there's going to be an admin halt because we're going to sort through this a little bit. There was none of that. It was the people that needed to take care of our casualty took care of our casualty, and off we went. And I actually moved with Jay Brimston. I don't know I moved with Jay Brimston's platoon that night, and I remember because it was a company XO, and Jay, we just got these Gore-Tex sleeping bags, and Jay was not going to be a Gore-Tex Ranger. There was no way. And so I'm kind of sitting there in the patrol base wanting to pull out my Gore-Tex sleeping bag, but you're ashamed. Yeah. And Jay, what a tough Ranger Jay is.
Yeah. You don't want to be the first one. That's just a general rule, is you don't want to be the first one. Yeah. Well, sir, I'd love for you to just, before we kind of break, at the 20-minute mark, just talk, because you went on to so many different capacities within JSOC and special operations and, high-level command throughout, and then, at the NATO level as well. I'd love for you to just, kind of talk about for a minute here, how that was a foundational period for you. You just listed so many great leaders across the Army. You just rattle them off, and there were huge influences on you, as you highlighted. I just loved, you to talk for a minute about how that was kind of a foundational period for you.
The Ranger battalions taught you what right was supposed to look like, and if you didn't get it right, you redid it. You went back until you could get it right, and not to take away from any other organization in the military, but it was very evident that you were going to meet the standard before you're going to move on to the next. You weren't going to progress until you met the standard. And so as I looked at the time in the regiment, whether it was, or Second Ranger Battalion in particular, whether it was a live fire or it was a jump, an assemble, whether it was a river movement, you were going to do it correctly, and you were going to do it correctly really using the fundamentals. And it was a very fundamental based organization, and I stood by that. There's times you deviate from the fundamentals, but you better learn them first. You better know what you're deviating from. And I thought, what a great place to understand the field and really go through some periods of privation. And we do that to ourselves in the Ranger Battalion from time to time.
Yes, we do. Well, I definitely want to dive in. It's been a conversation we've been having lately about, adversity and shared adversity and how that's a fundamental thing, not only within special operations, but the military by and large, and, how maybe we've kind of deviated away from that. And that's some of the problems we see. But before we do, I just want to transition 1 second here. So, hey, thank you everybody for tuning in. If you want to hear the rest of the episode with General Miller, please sign up and be an exclusive member. So we're going to really kind of dive into a lot of the rest of his career, some of the operations and some of the things that he's done throughout over a 3-decade career. And there's a lot to definitely unpack. So we're pretty excited to dive into that. And then to all exclusive members, hey, thank you for your support. Now let's deep dive into the remarkable career of General Miller. So, sir, I definitely want to come back and talk more about your career, but just right now, when we talk about this, this shared adversity and just kind of your experiences at multiple different levels and how that's a fundamental part of the culture of many of the special operation units and one, what your experience is as far as that goes. And then also, if you have any kind of thoughts or insights into how we've kind of deviated away from that, and that might also kind of be some of the reason we see some of the things happening in the military that we currently have.
Yeah, on tough times or uh, tough problems build tough teams. Now,
Yes,
you know as well as I do, Mike, we weren't always smart about how we solved those tough problems,
that
and
is a fact.
we probably hurt some people along the way trying to solve those tough problems. And I actually like where Regiment is today. Very hard, but very smart too on how they approach it. With the idea being, I think it's increased the longevity of a Ranger, non-commissioned officer. Make sure he's got a pathway and he's not going to be down and out with a bad back by
Yeah.
the time he's a staff sergeant. So I think we do some things well there. But without a doubt, you have to you really want to take your training, your opportunities to train, and again, not in a stupid way, but you want to make sure that everybody knows by the time they get to combat, if they get to combat, that they've done something harder. They have done something physically and mentally challenging. And it may not approach the worst parts of combat, but it sure will take you a long way down that path if you've done that. I mentioned Joe Stringham,
Hmm.
and I told you I was a little bit afraid of him for many years. And then when I finally got to Fort Benning, the Maneuver Center of Excellence in 2014, he came up to me in the reception. I said, "You don't know how much I've been afraid of you all these years." He was a tough regimental commander, and he was. He saw if he saw you not hitting the standard, he'd let you know. It was very direct, but he asked us to move long distances, be ready to fight under heavy loads, and that was the expectation. And he was out there walking it too. But those build these cohesive teams without a doubt. And I don't know that I could comment on what we're seeing now because I've been out for 3 years.
Right.
The leaders I know, both NCOs and officers, I suspect they still run some tough problems out there to
No,
make sure they get the formation right.
they definitely do, and I don't disagree with that. I think there's been, just because of some of the, well, the close of the war, definitely, that's caused a lot of things. I think we've deviated but from that. That hey, it's okay to do hard things, and I think you hit the nail on the head, sir. That there's always a risk we're going to hurt people. If we're pushing the limits, that's going to happen. Not only in live fires, but arduous movements. That's going to happen. But I think as long as we're doing it smart, that's not our intent. We're running risk mitigation factors. We shouldn't shy away from that because, just like you said, we need to be able to do that stuff in training so that we can perform the way that we need to perform in combat. I mean, as the saying goes, I'm very fond of it is you don't rise to the level of your expectations, you fall to the level of your conditioning and training.
Yeah, and I'd always talk when I had an opportunity to talk to young Rangers. Everyone got younger than me at a certain point, but I'd remind them it's
Yeah.
move further, faster, fight harder. I
Yeah.
mean that actually is real,
Yeah.
and that's an expectation because it's part of the creed. And It's not a. I tell people that creed is not a slogan. It's meant to be a culture statement. And
Yeah.
so you make sure again. Do you guys understand this? These are my expectations of you. And I could say that as an old guy looking at these young fit Rangers that could run circles around you and I today. Maybe not you, but me.
No, I was gonna say the reverse. I was gonna say they probably can't run around you, but
So
me.
I think that's got to be part of our
Yeah,
that culture of fitness. I know Randy George, as the chief, talks about that a lot.
yeah.
But culture of fitness has got to be real, and it's got to be driven in. That there's a reason why we expect our force to really be in great condition.
Yeah, I remember. You may remember the name Mark Schmitz, Sergeant Major Mark Schmitz.
Pretty
Um,
well.
yeah, he used to tell me, he was one of my squad leaders when I was a team leader. He said, as a leader, you can't afford to be tired. And I was like, and it did take me a while to understand what he really meant, in combat situations. And after a while, I'm like, yeah, I got to be the one that's laser focused, dialed in, and be able to make the tough decisions when everybody else is, sucking, and definitely, definitely something I've carried with me. And I
We,
still believe that even as a civilian.
yeah, we should. If you think about it, combat. If you're going to go into a fight, you certainly ought to be. As you talk about being smart, fast, lethal, and precise.
Yeah.
We ought to be dominating
Yes.
our adversaries in the physical space. We just should. Uh,
Absolutely.
you don't want to find yourself not prepared for somebody who's better prepared than you.
Yeah.
And the only way I know how to make sure that doesn't happen is you work hard every day to be ready for that eventuality.
Well, I think there's a great kind of segue, sir, as we talk about your career. So, we demonstrate, physically, but then also, shared adversity and everything else. You saw a career change, a major career change, but then also being part of Task Force Ranger, in Mogadishu. And I'd love for you to, just continue the conversation, but let's talk about that, specific operation.
Task Force Ranger. First of all, it's interesting. I'll go around. You go around and people find out in the Army, if someone's going to kind of fake that they're a Ranger, for some
Mhm.
reason they'll come up and say, "Yeah, I was in B Company 375," and you run into them and you're
Oh,
going,
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, yeah, okay. Yeah.
"Yeah." I hear that all the time. I actually, what's really interesting is over my years of service, found myself at consequential places with B Company 375, and
Oh,
most of them
yeah,
were doing
okay.
the
Yeah.
work. So immediately, if someone says I was in B Company 375, I go, "Can you tell me who your bosses were, who your platoon sergeants, squad leaders?" And
Yeah,
you can tell
yeah,
real quickly they weren't from B Company 375. But obviously, that's a company that cut their teeth in Mogadishu in a big firefight made up of multiple organizations. Clearly,
yeah.
Task Force Ranger. I explained that to people. Uh, I don't know that I actually knew it. I was a captain at the time,
Hmm.
little bit senior captain, but not so senior. I believe I was sitting at about 10 years of service, and my first combat action, by the way.
Hmm.
Uh, over my first 10 years of service, I tell people don't worry about it. Yours is out there waiting for you somewhere for
Be
all
patient.
those that think they missed it. But what we walked away from that operation is obviously a lot of loss. We had 18 killed, and evenly split amongst the different organizations. We're in a big firefight, and I tell people that in those moments you tend to learn a lot. And what I look back on that is certainly a foundational moment for me, and probably for many of the people on the ground that they were honest, and something that still carries over today, even though it's 31 years ago since that fight. But I think it made the Army better. And just without getting too detailed into equipment or
Yeah, yeah,
TTPs or anything like that, but the advances made in the medical field because of some of the combat losses we took that day were just they saved lives post 2001. Some of the equipment adjustments we made saved lives. If you can picture I think it advanced night vision in a big way, and certainly the integration of night vision with our weapon systems, it advanced it, and it was really you found the shortfalls, and really a lot of people did a lot of work. Whoever thought the Rangers would have strikers?
yeah. Boy. Yeah, definitely not.
Whoever thought I'd go is when I'd go up to any fob in Iraq, Afghanistan, and you go see the strikers out there, and whoever thought that would be the case, and really that really drove on the non-commissioned officer side. It drove from people looking at it saying, "Hey, what happened here is we lost tactical mobility. We lost the inability to really maneuver without getting shot."
Yeah.
And so there was a need for that. And it was, it was a time where people weren't willing to spend a lot of new money in pre 2001, but you saw people coming around to that over time. What I've done, talked about with Task Force Ranger on a collective level is I think I can look our families in the eye, the surviving families, and I'd say, what I promise you is the things that we learned that day, the sacrifice of your husband or your father or your son. I just want to make sure you understand that we didn't take that sacrifice. That was, you lost something so important to you, but we took those lessons and did something with it going forward, and it made us better, not just as the special operations community, but as an Army, and I think certainly to a certain degree, when we look at our national power, it made us better. So that's important. On a very personal level, I've told people I've cared. I mean, you don't forget the tactical. And it's you just don't forget it. But what I could tell people honestly is that I was looking at problems in 2021 and being able to look at the challenges we were facing in Afghanistan and remember in Afghanistan and pull on some of that at least into my thinking. And so I told people I said that became one of those that really mattered. And then of course I already mentioned a bunch of names, but not everybody did it. Some people went their separate ways and life happened, but a lot of the people on 3 October come back together. They come back together, and that's kind of remarkable. 31 years after the fact. So, but an important event for certainly the United States of America, and certainly for the Ranger Regiment and then the Special Ops community.
Yeah,
just trying to get our arms around what happened, how we get there, and then making sure those things we said never again, but they never again happened.
Yeah. Well, and correct me if I'm wrong. Since you retired, the only person that's left that was part of that task force is Reese Teakle. I think he's the only one left.
Is Reese still on active duty?
Yeah, he is. I don't know how much longer that has. I haven't talked to him in a couple weeks, but yeah, yeah.
So
I think he's the last.
So Reese was actually kind of funny because I hadn't run into him over the years.
Yeah.
And then we did a little LPD together with it while we were in Afghanistan. I think it was we probably might have done it on my last assignment. I don't recall.
Right.
But but then I finally go, Reese, where were you on that battlefield and what rank were you? And I think it was a PV2. And I go, so I wonder you're still on active duty.
Yeah.
But, I think he's the last one. There may be one or two others from other organizations.
No, there was only 2, and I think it was you. I think it was you and him. I think you were the only 2.
Bill Thetford had some time too. So
yeah, he did. Yeah,
I can't recall when Bill retired. So but
I can't. I think those were the 2 names. I knew the other one was an officer. I just couldn't remember which one it was. So yeah, that's funny. But one other thing, I just a critical point of Ranger history. We talk about strikers. So just for everybody out there, so what will basically happen? We come back from the deployment. We recognize the mobility need. We're going around in these fucking hodgepodge GMVs that we're putting steel, and they're trying to put these like fab kits on them. We need something different because part of the time we're rolling around in Panders and everything else, and basically we need a source of solution. And literally at JBLM, because that's where they stood up the striker brigades, they basically told us, they grabbed a bunch of us, and I think it was a squad leader or a team leader at the time, I can't remember. We basically just went over there and asked these striker guys, like, show us the vehicle. All right, let us drive the vehicle. And we're just driving, and they're like, are you guys even qualified on these things? We're like, no, not at all. And we're back behind Noble Hill and all this stuff. And then boom, we sent guys to General Dynamic, get qualified and everything else. And then that next deployment, we had strikers in fucking Baghdad. And we actually had them, fun fact, and because the sergeant major that I served with a couple different times throughout my career, their claim to fame is that they were the first strikers in Iraq. And I was like, dude, we'd already gotten blown up in strikers by the time you guys arrived with your first striker.
I think, and I don't know if this is, we should probably check with them. General Mick Nicholson, I think, had a battalion over there. And I think those are the strikers you got.
Yeah.
And I think he was probably, he ran into an accommodating commander who understood the need. And I
Yes.
think he's, if I'm not mistaken, also alumni of Second Ranger Battalion
I
too.
think, yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds right, sir. Well, I appreciate you sharing about, Task Force Ranger. And I think that kind of, that's been a sentiment of not only the people involved in that operation, but that were in the early days of the Ranger Regiment, in the special operations community, that was a huge pivot point that, hey, we need to go into lesson learn mode and, urban focus, medical focus, marksmanship, all the, equipment as well, equipment that'll sustain us, through these operations if we find ourselves back in this situation. And while we still walked a lot, we still did a lot of that stuff that, made Ranger Regiment, what it was. It allowed us a lot of flexibility when 2001 happened. And, so I'd love for you to kind of talk, special operations as a whole, how we met the challenges after the towers fell, and then, the evolution of the special operations community throughout the years.
Well, even though we were pushing it, and I know regiment was as well, we were
Yeah.
pushing for new equipment.
Yeah.
We were budget constrained. We were all budget constrained, and so a lot of the new equipment didn't really come certainly as fast as we all wanted it to come. But post 2001, it started coming, and that's where part of this thing is opening the resources that so that they're available. But at the same time, what I think I'm most impressed by what was happening. It's almost a little bit like the pre-war years before World War II. You had people with no resources trying to figure out how to use tanks on the battlefield and
Yeah.
simulating tanks because couldn't afford tanks, and
Yes.
trying to figure out how to maneuver that type of thing. And I believe there was a lot of that going on in the community. And but it certainly was accelerated by combat. And by once the combat piece kicked off, there it was you had the overseas contingency funding kicked in, and
Yep.
so now you could start asking for things. It was interesting. I actually remember a story. Stan McChrystal sat me down. It was probably 2003, and he said, can you cost out all the things you need to be successful on this battlefield? At the time, we were, if you remember, the task force was looking for the last of the Saddam Hussein regime,
Yeah.
and we're getting ready to transition to an Al Qaeda focused target set. And I remember sitting down with him, and I was already thinking budget constrained. Well, if I go over $200,000, he's going to laugh me out of the room. And I remember him looking at me like, basically, I failed that test. And he says, "No, I'm talking about how many millions of dollars do you need as you're laying this thing out here." And I'd learned further, and it's just one. It's as younger people not in this environment understanding the need to scale.
Yeah.
And I think we started understanding the need to scale when we kept coming up short on our requests because we were. I never want to accuse the special operations community of having a culture of poverty, but
Yeah.
but at the same time, I do think that we were looking at resources in a different light and
Yes.
not necessarily realizing, no, this is about protecting the force. This is about accomplishing the mission. This is about being as lethal as possible when you need to be. And I think we as a whole would learn over time.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, and it's wonderful that you talked about, General McChrystal sitting you down, 2000, right, three time frame after, the invasion of Iraq. And, our next major mission, at least for what I was a part of, was, winter strike. And, we talk about, Iraq, and yeah, sure, there was a little bit more budgeting. We got, some newer equipment and stuff. But I remember we needed cold weather equipment. And at the time, we really didn't have anything. It was all antiquated. It was, it definitely was not going to meet the needs of what we were about to step into in November and December in Afghanistan. And I just remember the supply sergeant, the S4, they were buddies of mine. And they were like, they literally told us that the max limit on the credit cards was $1 million and to go to REI and outdoor research and buy everything that we needed. And I just remember all of us being like, they did what? Like, holy shit, and they're having to, bring stuff around the country to meet our needs. But so it was kind of neat to hear you say that because no one's ever said that before, that really kind of opened up the mentality of the equipment needs. And I mean, really, at the end of the day, the reason for the budgets and the equipment, all that stuff for special operations is because we're constantly flexing to new environments, and we need the equipment to meet the demands.
Yeah, there was and that's obviously dangerous territory, just open, given the open credit card.
Yeah.
But what I found is, for the most part, people still remain good stewards of the
Oh
resources.
yeah. I mean, yeah,
And and that's what leaders, and particularly your non-commissioned officer, I said, is always the conscience.
yeah,
Leaders need to make sure that we don't start getting a little crazy there and start feeling entitled. But
yeah.
we do ask for what we need, and I think that probably what Stan McChrystal, General Stan McChrystal, knew that we didn't know. I mean, he'd just come from the Joint Staff, so he'd been up there.
Right.
It starts expanding your horizons. If you've lived down in a in a platoon or a troop, or you don't really understand it as big as he did. And I think he came in and helped us open our eyes a little bit, as how to use resourcing and some of the advantages we should have in a way that contributed to the mission.
Yeah, and there's multiple people that have accounts of him doing that, even before those times too.
By the way, I missed Winter Strike, but I kept close tabs on all of you up there in Winter Strike. It wasn't quite as cold in Baghdad, but it was cold that winter.
Yeah, well, still there's top three coldest. One is a mountain in Afghanistan. Two is doors open, Black Hawk, Baghdad, December. Yeah,
Those are chilly, or somewhere
yeah,
out in the Al Anbar. But
yeah.
but I don't know how much
Uh,
Yakima time you got too. That would have conditioned
well,
you.
yeah, yeah. Come on, I think you just like mentally prepare yourself. It's like jumping on an airfield. You know you're going to get kicked in the nuts. You see it coming a mile away, and there's nothing you can do about it. Yakima's the same damn way.
It's great, high desert, love it.
Absolutely. Well, sir, this has been awesome so far. So, again, we talk about, just, shifting around and, being at critical times in the Army. We'll come back to, your JSOC years, but, well, actually, before we shift to Fort Benning and, at the Maneuver Center of Excellence, I would like you to, just talk a little bit, overall, the volatile times of Iraq, and Afghanistan, from 2003 up until you go to the maneuver course, and just seeing the evolution of, the task force as a whole, not only from, your side, but then also watching, General McChrystal again saying, hey, we need to pressure the network. We need to give the Ranger Regiment more responsibility. We're going to assume some risk here, but, they're going to either rise to the occasion or they're not. And some ways we did, in some ways we didn't. But it really we saw a huge expansion of the overall special mission, or I'm sorry, special operations ability.
Yeah, it took us a little while again, and we're prisoners of how we've grown up in some
Yep.
cases.
Yep.
That's Rangers. It's any other organization in the network. There's a way as an organization. You have your culture, your expectations. You just call it the mission essential task list. This is what we do.
Yep.
Uh, you're not allowed to do this. I'm only allowed to do this. And no, you stay over there. I've got this one. But as we really started understanding the fight we were in, and you remember General McChrystal stayed there, I want to say from 2003, and I think he came out in 2008,
Yeah.
which is a long time
Very long
as
time.
that commander. And you watched him evolve too.
Yeah.
And really what it is he's this continuity as we're all rotating in, rotating out in some cases. And he probably had the best understanding of the different. I mean, there's others that understood the fight well too, but it's really what is the fight we're in, and we're really getting down to it's all hands on deck by necessity.
Hmm.
If you remember, there was probably a rule: hey, you're a support guy, you don't have this, you don't have that, you're not allowed to go on this operation. Well, we needed them,
Yeah.
and so then we had to train them to make sure that they were capable and could survive on that. If things went bad. So they all of a sudden now, hey, they do need medical training. They actually need to be able to shoot. So that's part of the evolution. It's out of necessity that you see it. And, I think you probably remember, I mean, there's times where we had a lot of people out every single night in
Oh
multiple
yeah.
sectors. And
Yeah.
what I can tell you is you're not using all those organizations, then you're not out in as many places.
Yeah.
And so that I think helped us with growth and helped us get over, like I said, being prisoners in our own museum. Hey, this is how it's supposed to go. This type of operation, and then when we get into really, if there's a precision type operation, then you pick the force of choice.
Yep. Absolutely.
You pick it, and you what you're doing is you're not picking another one. You're really looking at who's got the best chance of success with this type of with these conditions. But I think it helped us grow. And I think it helped us come together. What's interesting too, we ought to just talk about it. Relationships actually do matter, Mike. I mean, we all the time. And because certainly if you have a crappy relationship in that adjacent unit, you're not going to cooperate as well. If the leaders aren't getting along, you're not going to get you're not going to get a team effect. You're going to get individual organization effect. I'll tell you my time. I had some really good counterparts. Paula Cameron and I have been friends for quite a few years, and we just seem to bounce into the same spaces. And Paul's getting ready to retire. By the time this podcast released, Paul will retire.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he should be retiring this month or coming out of command. I'm not sure when his actual date is.
Oh, man.
But I remember the staffs would argue and argue and argue. And Paul was in one country, I was in another country. And Paul would look at it and go, hey, guys, Miller's got the main effort. We've got to weight the main effort. Do you guys not get that? And, the expectation was the other way, too. No, Paul, now you're the main effort. Here you go. And it's those are critically important. And then you know how it goes with the non-commissioned officers, too. You got to have the ability to need a piece of this, a piece of that to put this together and then work together on targets at times, too.
Yeah. I mean, when it didn't go well, it was obviously visible and it impacted the overall mission and their ability to do things. I mean, one of the best relationships I ever formed was with John Kuhn, and, and he, our ability to work together because of shared blood and everything else. I mean, really, really, gave us the ability to just accomplish amazing things, but then also, learn from one another and build off of each other, and not only in missions, but then also in training as well. Cause then there's just so much symmetry there, but I think relationships do matter, but I think there's a lot of egos to be checked as well, especially when you talk about special operations as a whole. That's a difficult fucking ask.
You think there might be some egos involved?
Yeah, right. That's all it is.
I'll tell you my view on it now. I watch it, and I'm impressed. I mean, I watched the interaction amongst different organizations and with the headquarters. I'm just impressed. The back and forth and the give and take, I think, is it's probably not everybody, but it's it appears to go pretty deep into different organizations.
Well, and I mean, it's an evolution. It takes time. And I think we're just going to continue to see it get better. I agree, 100%. Yeah, because we saw it get better in our time. So, yeah. Well, I appreciate diving into that a little bit, sir. I've asked this question, and I'm curious to your perspective because at the end of the day, this is a podcast about the 75th Ranger Regiment. And I appreciate your opening comments. This is about the regiment. It's not necessarily about any individual. I think that's what we've all kind of learned, throughout the years. But I would love, just your perspective, just on the 75th, and you're watching, from a different perspective, not involved, not necessarily in the 75th, their change and their evolution, and them, rising to the occasion.
Well, what was did you guys have the Big Five? Was that the
yeah, Big Five? Yep.
The basics, essentially. And there's no reason that Big Five is not resonant in any military organization. It makes so much sense. And the ability to execute that over and over allows you to do other things, and it allows you to expand your horizons a little bit. And I watched the regiment master that, and a little bit of a challenge sometimes, because you're bringing people out of you're bringing 18 and 19-year-olds up to the same. They need to be operating at the level.
Yep.
But given the right leadership, you've seen them excel as well. And it's just more what they're just lacking is some experience to go forward. But the evolution, I'll give you an example. When I went back to JSOC it was 2016. I hadn't been necessarily out of the community. I'd been out of that particular organization, though. And even though I saw parts of it in my different overseas assignments, really when I got down and you start really diving deep and go, what is the Ranger Regiment doing? What is it doing? And you go, wow, they've evolved. A lot of the organizations have, and it's actually trying to get your arms around it. And in many cases, they're evolving in the right direction without guidance. It's a problem when they evolve in directions without guidance, and it's not, they're running off the reservation there.
Right.
But it's no, you've seen it. I mean, you go down there, and we, like I said, we saw it at JBLM, we saw it at the regimental change of command, and you just go out there and you look at it, and maybe hard for some of the veteran Rangers to acknowledge. Guys, these guys aren't too bad, and they may do things differently than you, but you may not have been able to do the things they're doing today because we didn't go through the same. We didn't go through the same process. Although I think you probably had RASP. Did you have RASP when you went in?
We had RIP, but I was part of the implementation of the RASP 1 and RASP 2, and actually I had to go through RASP 2 when I came back to the Ranger Regiment. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's no joke, and it's not just. I would say my RIP class as an officer in particular. You had to do things, but it was just pass these, and then you really don't have to do anything else. Learn how to tie your rucksack and get it set up for combat operations. Run the 5 mile, do a PT test. But I think what they've got going now, it's a hell of a course.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, Kurt Donaldson, Brett Johnson, some of the recent regimental sergeant majors we've talked about the byproduct of those RAS 2 courses and those kids that are coming out of there nowadays. It's like, holy shit! Like, wow, the level they're doing things on is far exceeds what I was doing as a private.
Those two names too. I mean, to me, as I look at them, because I can remember them young Rangers, and now I kind of envision them as these wise old men that really had a quite an impact on it. Yeah, and Kurt is obviously out, but Brett's still going. So
yeah, I just saw a picture of Brett. He was out there leading a brigade ruck run or something like that, or like some competition, and he's
probably won it.
Front. Yeah, he did. He
probably won.
He's still just such a beast. He said,
"Yeah, Brett is. He's phenomenal. We had him up at JSOC headquarters too.
Oh,
okay. You just knew we all knew he is going to be one of these key non-commissioned officer leaders in the military.
Yeah, no, and he will continue. Well, I'd love to talk about Fort Benning. Your major transition there. And coming in and leading the maneuver center of excellence. Also during another transition time as we saw changes in implementation in combat arms, but then also in Ranger School, sir.
Yeah, actually Benning. Here's an interesting story about it. I didn't know I was going to Fort Benning. I was actually contemplating. I was commanding the SJTF, the Special Joint Task Force in Afghanistan, and I was starting to think that here I am. I'm getting a 2-star command. It's in Afghanistan, and I was starting to contemplate getting out of the Army. And I actually talked about it with Admiral McCraven, and he said, "Don't tell anybody you said that." I said, "Okay." He goes, "If you tell someone you said that, everyone's just going to think you're getting out, and you won't be considered for any more assignments." And so then I said, "Okay, I better shut my mouth then." And then General Odierno came over to visit us in Afghanistan, and he pulls me aside. He goes, "What's this I hear about you're not getting out of the Army?" He tells me that. And I go, "Sir, where'd you hear that from?" He goes, "Bill McCraven." I said, "Oh, he told me not to tell anybody, but he told the Chief of Staff of the Army." So what he said was, "Hey, I'd like to get you into an Army assignment." Unknown what Army assignment that was going to be. And so then I'd find out towards that late spring, that it was going to be Fort Benning, now Fort Moore. And, kind of excited about it because in my view, with all the joint operations I'd done, it'd really been a while since I've been back to the Army, the big Army. Yeah. And we'd been in a lot of, you saw a lot of Army units in the different combat theaters, but really just being focused on a U.S. Army organization. It was pretty fast. It was a great assignment. I tell the story when I went to go get interviewed for Afghanistan, which I didn't know I was getting interviewed. I was told Secretary Mattis, I said, he said, "What's your favorite assignment?" At the time, I go, "Secretary, I really enjoyed my time at Fort Benning." And he kind of looked at me strange. I think he wanted me to say something about killing Al Qaeda or something else.
Oh, of
Would have
course.
been, right at the highlight. But he kind of gave me a strange look on it. And he says, "Why?" And I said, "It's where all the leaders, the leaders of the future, are all coming through there." I said, "They're not going to be leaders tomorrow. Some of the lieutenants will go out and be platoon leaders." I said, "But you're going to meet the privates. They're going to be sergeants. You're going to see sergeants at the NCO Academy." And then we had, as you mentioned, we were asked a question early on. What do you think about women attending Ranger School? And I don't think I'd really thought about it deeply one way or the other. I didn't know whether we'd get people through or not, that type of thing. And I came back down to Fort Benning because I'd gone up for some kind of in brief in Washington, D.C. And I came down and I asked the team, I go, "Hey, let me ask you a question." And I think they'd heard something because they were actually looking at this and planning for it. Emotional event, Mike, you know that. It was no one can, people can say what they want about it. I actually learned a lot from that one. And I think there was a little bit of, no one's going to yell at Miller. He's if Miller says it's okay, it's going to be okay. No, I got a lot of disinformation thrown my head. And I was up in the mountains grading patrols reportedly. And I'm just going, who writes that stuff? Who would write something like that? But it was so as we put them through, I always tell people, I said, people assume I got a lot of pressure on that. And I try to explain to them, because people would send me like almost these notes of condolence. "Oh, you must be getting pressured to get somebody through the course." I said, "No." I said, "Actually, I went up and briefed Sec Army. I took Dave Fivecoat, who was the ARTB commander, with me.
I know him very well.
Yeah. And the chief, General Odierno. And it was January, and we hadn't really started any of the pre-Ranger stuff. And I said, just so everybody's aware of, this could be a zero at the end of this. Is everybody going to be okay, or are we going to be surprised?" And Secretary McHugh and General Odierno and bat an eye. They just didn't. And so, at Fort Benning, what we really wanted to do was, okay, we've got this, run this pilot program, and I had Jim Rainey as my infantry commandant at the time. Really, what we said is, look, it's got to be transparent. It's transparent as Ranger School is. It's got to be transparent. It's got to be equitable. The secret, I told a couple of people, I said, I was actually looking at Ranger School rucks and thought they'd gotten too heavy. And as soon as they made that, guys running around with 85-pound rucks. You may have in Ranger School. I didn't carry an 85-pound ruck up and down the mountains of the TVD. It was always, but we've added so much special equipment. Yeah. I would have liked to have seen maybe some of that weight come off the students, not to do anything other than, it's not smart. It's not how we really do stuff for days on end. But I knew we couldn't change any standards. So at that point, whatever standards were in play had to stay in play. Yeah. And so we just kept them in there. And then some of the criticism of it, and it's still out there in some cases. People would say, "Well, Ranger School is not for women." And I'd stop them. I'd say, "It's not for all women." I said, "But it's not for all men either." I said, "All you actually have to do is go out and watch the RPFT on Monday morning at 0400, and you watch a lot of men take the are dropped immediately too." I said, but it is for some of them. And if it is for some of them, and we can really talk about this in terms of standards based, that's where we actually want our Army in a standards based thing. So yeah, it was very emotional, but I learned a lot too with the team, and it helped me in Afghanistan, believe it or not. When you start getting kind of crushed, you had to pay attention to social media. Yeah. When you started getting crushed on social media, you had to respond. And I said, listen, don't respond emotionally. Just put the facts in. Just answer with the facts. I said, but now if someone attacks a soldier and really is derogatory, I go, we're the leaders. We don't allow people to screw with our soldiers. Just scrape that comment off the site. Otherwise, let them be on there. Put the reply on there. If they say the standards were dropped, explain they weren't dropped. But it's that was one piece. But Benning was special for a couple of reasons. The Benning commander, the Fort Moore commander, maybe 2 years, maybe 2.5 years in place. And Benning rotates, or Fort Moore rotates so often, it's such a transient post, except the permanent units or the tenant units there. you have 2 years to touch lieutenants and captains and sergeants. And that's a cohort, 2 years. If you can get 2 years and you can actually spend some time with them and watch how they're learning, maybe not all of them, but there's a lot of them that will still come up to me and go, sir, you came over to me in captain's career course and you did this with us, or, and I don't necessarily remember the individual, but what I used to always say is, as we're working concepts and future concepts, we'll probably screw those up and not get those completely right. But if we screw the leadership piece of this thing up here and try to get these young leaders on a path where they can work in some complex environments, if we don't screw that up, they'll figure out the concepts for us. So, a fascinating assignment from that standpoint.
Yeah, 100%. And you're not lying about it being controversial and a hot topic. In fact, I was engaged on it today because good friends of mine that run a podcast called Mentor for Militaries. They recently released the episode of the first female that graduated Ranger School from the 75th Ranger Regiment, AG Officer Sydney, and boy, oh boy, whew, yeah, it's an interesting one. But I think two things, on what you just said is, one, you can disagree, you cannot like it, but if you're being disparaging, and you're just being, quite frankly, vulgar, and what I often comment, like, would you say that to your wife? Would you say that to your daughter? Then what in the hell makes you think you should say that on social media for the world to see? And then two, just because somebody else, it doesn't matter, genders, regardless, accomplishes something, doesn't mean it degrades from what you've accomplished.
There's a little bit of that. I'm coming up on, I think, 40 years from Ranger School, and I often joke. I go,
Oh, it's been a hot minute for me too. Yeah.
Yeah. I said I must have gone to the last easy course, and I tell people, and I joke about it. I said, oh yeah, we got a 24-hour break. There was a fatality before, and it was a school, and I actually know that it changed. I didn't follow it in the inner years, but there was times where people were just carrying butt packs, no rucks, and the idea was you got to be able to move fast, and we'll work resupplies because we actually need you to move fast. Then it was heavy rucks. Then it's no. I mean, it's just gone back and forth over the years, and so. But it's a school. That's what I remind people. It's a school that has a couple of things in common. You're probably going to lose some weight in that course. You're probably not going to sleep much, and at the end of it, you're really glad to get out of that course and go back to your unit.
Yeah.
But everyone will take what they took away from it. On a personal level, I think I took probably more away interperson, kind of seeing what I was all about when I got tired. From time to time, you'd see some either exceptional peers or you'd see some bad peers.
Yeah.
And bad peers are hard to shake off, even if years later, because you remember. So it's one of those courses. But again, the good news is that the people that are emotional about it, mostly it's because they care about it. The bad news if they start attacking soldiers, because we can't allow that.
No, 100%. Well, sir, I know you got a very, very important event that you want to get to tonight. So I got, kind of two more things that I really want to discuss with you. And the first one being, the Afghanistan withdrawal. Again, we talk about hot topics. We talk about things that, people want to talk about and are emotional one way or another about it. I'd love to, you to provide some kind of your insights and your thoughts on it.
Yeah. And Mike, just like you and I talked about, I really have not talked about that on podcast previously. I talk about it in smaller groups, and there's a reason for that. Is one, quite frankly, I'm still processing it. It's as you keep looking at it. Let's just go to the last 2 weeks of August. First of all, anybody, it almost doesn't matter how long you served there or how little you served there. That was a shock to our military veterans. And then it was punctuated. First of all, it looked like a really, it looked like a debacle. Just people flooding, people grabbing on the airplanes that were taking off and falling to their deaths. And really took you back to something like Saigon, which many of your listeners may not remember. But I certainly do as a young child. You're just looking at it going, what is going on here?
Yeah.
And it's the emotions are pretty strong, particularly amongst our veteran population. But I'll tell you, even our State Department colleagues and our intel community colleagues, we don't listen to that. They may not ride in the same networks we do, but I can tell you, it hits them pretty hard too. So and then of course it hits the Afghans very hard. Without being too top level, but I'll just explain to the listeners right now. I've testified on this a couple of times, and really where I still think we are is we're at the place where we're still looking for blame, and a lot of the blame comes without a lot of facts. That's one of the challenges with this, and where we want to get for the veterans, actually for the nation, so we don't repeat it. We want to get to the place where we're learning lessons from this. I'm reading an interesting book. I'd actually recommend it to your listeners. It's The Challenger, and it's really about it's the 1986 Challenger. That it was January '86. I was actually driving out the 2nd Ranger Battalion. I remember hearing the radio reports. The Challenger went up, and about a minute into flight, it exploded. And what they're doing is they're walking it all the way back. They're through the space program, decisions that were made, engineering decisions, and they're really kind of looking at where decisions were overridden, safety was sacrificed, that type of thing. But that's a pretty obviously for in-flight any flight accidents or mishaps. We know they follow us, follow that one down to the root cause as much as possible. I don't know that we're going to get to that in Afghanistan. Quite frankly, I don't know that we ever got there with Task Force Ranger. Really breaking down. I mean, our best AAR out of Task Force Ranger was Mark Ballin's book, because he talked to everybody and put them in there. And now we had hot washes at different levels, but so that's what's got to happen, because we learn the lessons, particularly if we lose life. And if you lose life, those were people that those lessons are so expensive. They were paid for in blood. And even as I watched it in August of 21, I was really hoping somehow we were going to muddle through without an incident. And then, of course, we had the attack at Abbey Gate, and we lost our service members. Families forever changed by that. But as you know, also, we have lost people in combat over the years as well. But it just puts a big piece on there. When you look at how I would describe it, and I don't know how many listeners really understand this, the military withdrawal was complete in July. It actually involved Rangers. Yep. Not surprisingly, with some expeditionary LREs, and had Rangers kind of cleaning up the airfield, and a limited visibility exfil, and they were gone. And that basically marked the end of our military contributions. Every military contribution, other than security that was going to be held in Kabul for our diplomatic facilities, was gone. That all of NATO was gone. Equipment was either destroyed or turned over, but we still were fixed as a nation. We were still fixed. And then when I told you I look back at TF Ranger, a lot of the decisions going down as I was working my way through this, it really came down to risk. You have a tactical level, you have an operational, and you have a strategic. Well, I think everybody can see that we obviously lost a strategic risk calculation, and then we had consequences at the tactical level in August of 21. So we lost it. We've had it happen before to us in the United States, and then we got ourselves in emergencies. And when you're in an emergency, I always tell people, the best way to deal with an emergency, and they're looking for some kind of profound wisdom, and I say, don't get to an emergency. Don't be in a position where you can be put in an emergency. And you probably had a couple of fights where you go, we're in an emergency. Now we're into contingencies we didn't dream of. Yeah, airlifting 120,000 people out. That wasn't a part of any plan. But when you're fixed and you have limited options, you've now found yourself in an emergency, and the emergency was the collapse of the Afghan government and the collapse of the security forces simultaneously. So I think there's more of a postmortem to come on there. It's not satisfying. It's certainly not satisfying to me. I of course look back on different decisions that were made. But again, it's, to put it in more simple terms, we lost the risk calculation.
Yeah.
And, I've been kicking around a couple other ideas. What could we have done? Okay, now we're in this situation where we're in the Kabul Bowl. What could we have done differently? And when we talked about, could you flex to Bagram? Could you do different things? Could you flex somewhere else? We didn't have a lot of options at that point. And that's another place you never want to be in an emergency without options. So, yeah, I think that's going to be one of those that gnaws at our guts for many years. And we really do need to fill some facts and really understand the decision making that went into that one, because we just don't want to do it again.
Yeah, 100%. There's no.
Yeah.
Well, I know that that's a tough subject, and I know, just like you said, you've had to testify that. I know it's also been part of your trepidation on going on other podcasts is, because that question is going to inevitably come up. But I appreciate you talking about it. And, as I told you in a couple of the phone calls that we've had, there's a lot of people that, are out there just like you, just like me. They're still just, trying to sort fact from fiction, but then also, just come to terms with it. And I think hearing from you, it'll be extremely helpful, especially with all the things that you said, sir. So I do appreciate you doing that. I really do. I think it's going to help the community by and large.
And if your listeners want to reach out and talk about it, certainly will. But I mean, I don't even think people know that the Ranger Regiment's role in the military withdrawal. There was a reason why I kept them till the end.
Yeah.
Because they had some capabilities to fight, protect, and do a lot of different things there. And they were the last out.
Yeah. So there's a very funny quote that many people have told me from a regimental sergeant major that we already previously brought up that jumped in a Rhino and then was on the second to last bird that left, with the Rangers. And he leaned over to the regimental commander at the time and said, "That was the longest rod I've ever participated in."
Yeah, we thought a lot of people were going to be going out of Bagram at that point, but to include myself, I thought I was going out of Afghanistan in C-130, but not to be.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, sir, I definitely appreciate the time. One last topic that I know that you want to talk about, and like you and I we're both kind of still in that journey of the transition, but talking about the challenges and the difficulties with transitioning out, especially after 30 plus years in the career. Something I didn't highlight, and I don't know if somebody's actually did the math on this and it's verified or not, but I've read in multiple places that you were the most deployed soldier in the global war on terrorism.
See, I don't know that either. So
yeah, I don't know that either, but 10 years, I haven't heard anybody that close yet. So
there's probably somebody out there.
There probably is, but
it's like Reese Teakle staying in there and just making sure he's the last guy out.
Yeah, I think that's his goal.
Yeah, Mike, I've
talked about transitioning.
Yeah, I've talked about that, and I actually do think it's appropriate, particularly if anybody's active duty, listening to this thing, because what I can guarantee you is you're going to transition at some point.
Yep.
You may have another 20 years, you may have another year, you may have another 6 months, but it's a little bit like jumping into some cold water, and I often say I'm not sure it's best coming from a retired 4-star general. It sounds like here. Let me tell you my first world problems, but it's quite real. Some of the things the guys are dealing with, and you hear it. It's something that, as I believe I described it this way on Joe Byerly's podcast, it's mushy. You're out here. You've got this purpose. I've talked about it at JSOC. What we used to always say, when we talk about our culture statement, and we say we'll be whatever the nation needs us to be. Pure and simple, very, very straightforward. If the nation needs this, then we'll do this. If the nation needs that, we'll do that. And then you step out, that's your culture statement. And the next day you're out of the Army. The Army keeps moving on, and the services keep moving on. No one's really calling you up looking for any grand opinions at that point. And you realize that, well, what is my purpose now? How do you find that? And what I talk to people is, I said, in my view, it comes down to habits. I think you have to continue to learn. And by habits, I mean good habits. I always talk about find the best habits that you had while you were in that kept you moving in the right direction, and just front load those on a daily basis. You'll probably develop some bad habits, but just keep pushing the good ones to the forefront. In my view, in my case, it took a little while, but you have to leave some things behind. And it's the recognition that I'm a cheerleader now. I'm on the sidelines, and I'm looking at the Chris Donahues, the Mitch Bradleys, and the rest of these guys, the John Bragos, the Brett Johnsons, and you just realize you go, those are the guys I'm cheering on and really want to. They don't need necessarily my advice, but they get my support. That comes in when they can cash that check whenever they want to. But I think leaving it behind is at least for me personally, is not a bad thing. You do have to look for some relevance in your life. Let's look at you. You're podcasting. You're informing large audiences of sometimes difficult issues. You're still able to talk to different people, but everyone will look for their, what makes you feel relevant, and certainly purposeful will matter. I talked about I'm doing a few things in retirement work. And the one I like the absolute best is being a senior fellow at the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point. And I told you the reasons earlier in the podcast why I liked it, but it feels right. I just got off a call with Shields and Stripes, which is a nonprofit that I support that supports veterans and first responders, trying to help people through this transition, get over that moat, don't get caught in the moat, get them over the moat, and moving on. And those are the things that when it comes right down to it, you have to go out and make a living, but doing something positive starts feeling a little bit like relevance there. And I think you're doing some of that with this work you're doing as well.
I appreciate that. I definitely stumbled upon it, and I tell people that ask me about starting a podcast, I tell them not to. Just have a buddy that has one.
You and Joe can compare the tactics, techniques, and procedures. I've talked to him about his a little bit too.
Yeah.
I don't want to do a pod. I don't mind participating in a podcast, but I don't necessarily want to do one.
Yeah.
And, Mike, if there's anything I can do, I'm not sure where we're going to cross paths next. Please let me know. And like I said, if there's somebody who says, "Hey, I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about this topic,"
yeah,
I'm available for outreach.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I definitely will take you up on that. Well, our paths seem to have crossed like a lot in the last like 6 months. It seemed like we saw each other like at 3 different locations. So all across the United States.
It's usually where Rangers hang out, is what I noticed.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that was fair. Okay. Well, before I close this out, sir, anything else that you kind of want to say to the larger audience? Any kind of closing thoughts or segments?
I'll hold there. We discussed earlier about maybe talking leadership pieces, but we'll save that.
Okay.
I think you and I have burned some airtime here.
Yeah, we have.
These are good though. They make you think. They make me think.
Yeah.
And I think I did give some assigned reading there. The Challenger.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've only got other book recommendations if people are looking for things. What's going on? Because I actually do like what you said. Fact-filled I like fact-filled conversations. I don't like fact-free conversations. And the more you can get filled with facts, it makes a conversation a lot more productive.
100%. Well, thank you for coming on the show today. Really, really appreciate you taking the time, and I know everybody's going to enjoy hearing from you. Hey, and thank you everybody for tuning in to Legend of the 75th. Hey, do me a favor, make sure you share this episode with one Ranger buddy so that we can get all the word out about what we're doing here. Rangers lead the way. All right, let me stop the recording.